So in my previous video, I was talking about how things have changed in the Middle East very quickly and not in Israel's favor. But I said it in the next video that I would reveal something that this has already been revealed years ago, but the world has not paid attention to it. The true national origin of the current president of Russia. This comes from an article in the Telegraph from way back in 2008. And I have pointed out that in Ezekiel 38 and 39, that GOG is the republic, what is today the Republic of Georgia. And you can go and do your, please folks, do your own research. The citizens of GOG in the old days were called Gorgons or Georgians, however you want to pronounce it. So, when we read Ezekiel 38 and 39, I will use the New American Standard Bible. I'll go to Ezekiel 39 and verse 1. And you, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and say, Thus saith Jehovah Elohim, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh. Rosh is Russia. So, in this particular passage, it declares that the Prince of Rosh is Georgian by descent. Prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. Now, Meshach is known today as being Mushki, or Moscow, and Tubal was the capital city of Georgia. Now, what did Vladimir Putin do? Check this out. All right, this is in Wikipedia. Following Vladimir Putin's rise to power in Russia in the year 2000 and a pro-Western change of power in Georgia in 2003, relations between Russia and Georgia began to deteriorate, reaching a full diplomatic crisis by April 2008. Okay. I will start from the beginning. The Russo-Georgian War was a war between Georgia, Russia, and the Russian-backed self-proclaimed republics of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The war took place in August 2008, following a period of worsening relations between Russia and Georgia, both formerly constituent republics of the Soviet Union. Fighting took place in the strategically important Transcaucasia region. It was regarded as the first European war of the 21st century. The Republic of Georgia declared its independence in early 1991 as the Soviet Union began to fall apart. Amidst this backdrop, a war between Georgia and separatists left parts of the former South Ossetian Autonomous Oblast under the de facto control of Russian-backed but internationally unrecognized separatists. Following the war, a joint peacekeeping force of Georgian, Russian, and Ossetian troops was stationed in the territory. Meanwhile, a similar stalemate developed in the region of Abkhazia, where Abkhaz separatists had waged their own war in 1992 and 93, following Vladimir Putin's rise to power in Russia in the year 2000 and a pro-Western change of power in Georgia in 2003. Relations between Russia and Georgia began to deteriorate, reaching a full diplomatic crisis by April 2008. By the 1st of August 2008, Ossetian separatists began shelling Georgian villages with a sporadic response from Georgian peacekeepers in the region. Artillery attacks by pro-Russian separatists broke a 1992 ceasefire agreement. To put an end to these attacks and restore order, the Georgian army was sent to the South Ossetian conflict zone on August the 7th. Georgians took control of most of Skin Valley, a separatist stronghold, within hours. Russian troops had illicitly advanced into the South Ossetia conflict zone by August the 7th before the Georgian military response. Russia accused Georgia of aggression against South Ossetia and launched a full-scale land, air, and sea invasion of Georgia on the 8th of August with the pretext of peace enforcement operations. Russian and Ossetian forces battled Georgian forces in and around South Ossetia for several days until Georgian forces retreated. Russian and Abkhaz forces opened a second front by attacking the Kodori Gorge held by Georgia. Russian naval forces blockaded part of Georgian coast, and the Russian Air Force attacked targets beyond the conflict zone in undisputed parts of Georgia. This was the first war in history in which cyber warfare coincided with military action. An advanced information war was also waged during and after the conflict. The French presidency of the EU, in person of Nicolas Sarkozy, negotiated a ceasefire agreement in the 12th of August. Now, I'm mentioning this to set something up here. So we go to an article in the Telegraph, 2008. The title is, "Could This Woman Be Vladimir Putin's Real Mother?" Little is known about the childhood of Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Despite his position as one of the world's most powerful men, now in an extraordinary development, a Georgian woman has come forward to say that she is his mother. Now, I will stop right here for a second. If she is right, that makes Vladimir Putin a Georgian. GOG. He is also the head or prince of Rush today. And when they invaded Georgia, they basically made Georgia a vassal state, thereby Tbilisi or Tubal being under subjection of the leader of Russia. After all, you see what the Russians did with Georgia, don't you? It's all starting to come together now, isn't it? And by the way, Joe Stalin, well, his last name was not Stalin. Joe Stalin was a Georgian as well. One of the greatest murderers in European history. So, this article is by Kate Weinberg, December 2008. Vera Putina, 82, has claimed that Vladimir Putin is the child she gave away at the age of 10, giving an account of an unhappy childhood which is fiercely disputed by the Kremlin. Vera Putina lives hand-to-mouth in rural Georgia but displays the famous hospitality of the people of the Caucasus. Draping a cloth over the table of her garden, she piles it with fruit, nuts, shot glasses of chacha, homemade vodka. Her house sits on a dirt track in the village of Metaki, about 12 miles from Gori, which was occupied by Russian tanks this August during the conflict over the breakaway state of South Ossetia. A tiny woman with gnarled worker's hands, only Mrs. Putina's strong cheekbones and deep-set piercing blue eyes are suggestive of who she claims she is. And when you look at the picture, you will see it in the eyes. I used to be proud of having a son who became president of Russia. Since the war, I am ashamed. Since Russian-born Mrs. Putina saw Vladimir Putin on the television in 1999, she has been convinced he is her estranged son. Backed up by other residents in Metaki, Mrs. Putina claims he lived in the village between the ages of 2.5 and 10 before being sent back to his grandparents in Ochyur, Russia. Records in the archives of Metaki's closest town, Caspy, indicate that a Vladimir Putin was registered at Metaki school. 1959 through 1960, stated nationality, Georgian. Mrs. Putina's account is at odds with the Kremlin's version of events, and Dmitry Peskov, Mr. Putin's spokesman, yesterday dismissed the claim, saying the story is not true, it does not correspond to reality at all. Mr. Putin's quasi-autobiography, First Person, paid for by his election campaign in 2000, states that he is the sole surviving son of a factory worker and ex-serviceman of the Soviet Navy and spent his early years in the rat-infested communal apartment of St. Petersburg. Mr. Putin claims his grandfather, Spiridon Putin, had been Vladimir Lenin's and Joseph Stalin's personal cook, and both his parents died of cancer, his mother in 1998 and his father in 1999. But Mrs. Putina's claim to the maternity of Russian leaders highlights how little is known about the childhood of one of the world's most powerful men. The published details of his upbringing are strikingly scant. Mrs. Putina's account also brings a personal dimension to the recent war between Russia and Georgia and exhumes memories of another Russian strongman and Georgia's most famous son, Joseph Stalin. In Mrs. Putina's account, Mr. Putin's father was a Russian mechanic, Platon Privilov, who got her pregnant while married to another woman. She claimed her son, nicknamed Vova, was born on October the 7th, 1950, exactly 2 years before Mr. Putin's official birth date. In 1952, Mrs. Putina married a Georgian soldier, Georgi Osipali, and moved to Georgia with her son. In December 1960, under pressure from her husband to disown her child, she delivered Vova back to his grandparents in Russia. Mrs. Putina believes that the St. Petersburg-based parents referred to in Mr. Putin's biography adopted her son from his grandparents. Shura Gabinashvili is a former Russian teacher of the village school in Metaki. She claims to have given the child Russian language classes between 1958 and 1960 and says that she has received death threats about making the claims public. She remembers Vova as an extremely bright child, the brightest in the class. He loved Russian fables, and Russia was his favorite subject. He also liked fishing and wrestling. He was the shortest child in the class, but he always wanted to win at everything. Mrs. Putina is diffident about her son's relationship with his stepfather, but admits that Georgie was very strong with the children. But Vova was a quiet child who read a lot and didn't like relationships. In December 1960, having received an ultimatum from her husband, Mrs. Putina traveled with Vova back to Ochyor. After staying 1 week to tend to her sick mother, she left the boy with her parents and returned to Georgia. She claims the next time she saw her son was on television in 1999. When asked how she recognized him from the boy she had last seen aged 10, she says, "Do you think I would not recognize my son?" Photo fit experts in Moscow have been unconvinced that the black and white photographs Mrs. Putina has of her son, age 7, is the current Russian Prime Minister, or now the current Russian President. Mrs. Putina's story is also grist for the brilliant PR machine that works within the Georgian government. Commentators have accused the small republic of manipulating the press over its recent conflict with Russia, with some claiming that while the Russians may have won the war in August, the Georgians claimed a propaganda victory. If Mrs. Putina's story is to be believed, the Georgians can argue that Mr. Putin's Georgian link has echoes of Joseph Stalin's upbringing, who was raised in Gori and physically abused by his mother's alcoholic husband. And while critics of the Iraq War and the U.S. media have theorized that George Bush went to war in Iraq to avenge the assassination plot of his father's life by Saddam Hussein, the Georgians could claim that Mr. Putin went to war this summer to wipe clean the slate of his childhood. But at the very least, Mrs. Putina's story identifies the holes in the known story of Mr. Putin's past. The official line is that Mr. Putin's parents were already in their 40s when Mr. Putin was born, which leaves a gap of over 15 years since the births of their previous sons, Oleg and Viktor, neither of whom survived childhood. Details of the first 10 years of Mr. Putin's life are scarce in his autobiography, especially when compared with other world leaders. Despite having appeared in various European publications since 2000, efforts to get to the bottom of Mrs. Putina's story have so far been short-lived. The Russian journalist and media magnate Artyom Borovik was on his way to Kiev when his private plane crashed. Allegedly, he was on the point of publishing the story about Mrs. Putina. The Italian journalist Antonio Russo electronically transmitted footage of Mrs. Putina to Italy shortly before he was shot dead near Tbilisi. Neither deaths have been proved to have any connection with Mrs. Putina. Mrs. Putina states she is no longer willing to talk to journalists on the subject, but challenges Mr. Putin to disprove her story. "I am ready to do a DNA test if he is." This is a compelling article, is it not? And with what is happening, what has just happened in Israel today, in the Middle East today, this story is even more compelling. People getting shot, people getting murdered for trying to tell the story of Vladimir Putin's possible mother and his real origin, or the possibility of his true origin being from GOG, the land of Magog. You read the story, you come to your conclusion. I'm not saying that I have come to my own conclusion, but I will say this. if I was given a choice to believe a government-controlled version or the version of a short, sky blue-eyed old woman with the last name Putina, who does resemble Vladimir Putin, I most certainly am not going to believe the government's version, because governments always lie.